The day my stepmother traded me to the most feared mafia family in Korea, everyone thought my life was over. Even I believed it. I was handed over like property. No goodbye, just a debt that needed to disappear. But months later, what happened next transformed a servant into the queen of the Hyna Empire. Susan was standing at the center of the kitchen room, not cooking, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes already fixed on the doorway. Behind her, near the back door, stood two men Kemi had never seen before. Korean men, both dressed in dark clothing that had no business being in this neighborhood at this hour. Kemi stopped. Susan. Her voice came out careful. Who are these people? Susan uncrossed her arms. She looked for just a moment like she was going to say something human, but she never said anything immediately. She only looked away from Kemi. Get your things, she said. Kemi didn't move. What? I said get your things, Kemi. Her voice was flat. You don't need much, just what you need. Men near the back door hadn't moved nor spoken. They were watching her. The cold started at the base of Kemi's spine and moved upward. Susan. She kept her voice low, controlled. What is happening right now? Susan looked at her. And in that look, just for 1 second, Kemi saw it. No remorse nor love. Just decision, the look of a woman who had weighed two things against each other and chosen the one that didn't cost her anything. Family owes a debt, Susan said. I have been paying it and I can't manage it anymore. I want to clear it off faster, so that way I have decided to trade you out for it. What debt? What are you? The Hina Mafia family. Susan said, like that explained everything, like those words were supposed to land and make sense and close the conversation. They didn't. The Hina Mafia family. Kemi repeated it slowly. That's Susan, that's... She stopped. Because she knew that name, everyone in certain circles knew that name. The Hina family operated in and out of Seoul with hands that reached into different continents. People do not ask too many questions about them. Much, Kemi asked, and Susan said a number. The room tilted. And you, Kemi's voice broke slightly, then held. You're giving me to them to settle it. Susan said nothing. Susan. She took one step forward. Susan, look at me. Look at me and tell me that is not what is happening right now. That's the choice I have to make, Susan said. Is Linda coming too? Kemi asked. Don't bring my daughter into this, you good-for-nothing girl. And there it was. Kemi understood it completely in that moment. Susan had a daughter named Linda, bright, loud, careless Linda, who had never done a day of hard work in her life because her mother had always made sure she didn't have to. And Susan was not going to give Linda to the ruthless Hina Mafia family. Talk less of trading her for a debt. But Kemi was Charles's daughter, her late husband. She was the easier thing to lose. One of the men stepped forward toward her with the quiet certainty of someone who has never once had to ask twice for anything, and that certainty was its own kind of force. Come, he said. His English was clean and accented and completely without feeling. Kemi looked at Susan one last time. Susan was still looking at her with no remorse. There was nothing left to say. No words that would change this. No appeal to a love that had never fully existed. Her father was dead. His protection was dead with him. And Susan had made her move, and the calculation had come out the same way it always came out in houses like this one. The child who wasn't fully claimed was the child who could be given away. She walked out of the kitchen. Kemi did not get any of her stuffs. The drive took 4 hours. Kemi sat in the back seat between two men who did not speak to her, look at her, or even acknowledge her presence except to make sure she didn't move toward the door. She did not cry. She had learned, in the 14 months since her father died, that crying in front of people who do not care about you is a waste of the most private thing you have. So she saved it. She looked out the window and she thought about her father. Wish you were here, Dad. He would have never let this happen, but he was gone. And wherever life was leading, she was going to arrive at it with her back straight and her face still, because that was the only thing left that belonged entirely to her. The Hyna Empire appeared like something that shouldn't exist in the same world as the house she'd woken up in that morning. Gates of steel, men stationed at intervals, cameras angled with the precision of people who assumed everything was a threat until proven otherwise. The car rolled through without stopping. They were expected, and Kemi watched the gates close behind her in the side mirror. A woman met her at the entrance to the main house. Korean, middle-aged, with a clipboard and the expression of someone who processed arrivals. You will be assigned to household servant, the woman said, scanning her clipboard. Quarters are in the north wing. You will receive your duties in the morning. Where am I? Kemi asked. The woman looked up from the clipboard and blinked, as if the question was unexpected. You are in the Hyna Mafia Empire, she said. You belong to Z1 now. She said it plainly. Kemi held the woman's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded once and she followed her inside. She never saw Z1 during her early stay in the house. He was a presence she felt before she understood it, a shift in the energy of the house whenever he moved through it. Staff who had been talking fell silent, and men who had been relaxed straightened. She heard his voice once, through a closed door, giving an instruction in Korean. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because it has never once needed to repeat itself. She mopped floors, polished surfaces, served meals in rooms she wasn't allowed to linger in for long. She learned the rhythms of the house, not because you want to, but because survival requires it. The other staff were not unkind to her. They were simply indifferent. She was nobody here. She had been nobody at Susan's house too, but at least there she had known the shape of her nobodiness. Here it was new and without edges she could find. On a Wednesday, Kemi noticed the house changed quieter than usual, the senior staff moving with a tightness that suggested controlled alarm and hushed conversations. A doctor arriving through the side entrance, black bag in hand, escorted directly upstairs. By evening, the word had moved through the staff quarters in whispers. The ruthless king, Z1 is ill, a fever that had been building for days while he refused to acknowledge it. The way men like him refuse to acknowledge anything that suggests their body has limits. By the time it was undeniable, it had already gone deep, settled in, made itself at home. The senior staff organized his care with efficiency and distance. Medication kept, meals prepared and delivered by whoever was assigned and retreated from quickly. Nobody lingered nor asked if he needed anything beyond what was on the list. Kemi wasn't assigned to his floor. She had no business being there, but yet she went anyway. She couldn't have explained it cleanly if someone had asked her to why she went there. It wasn't strategy or calculation. It was something older and simpler than either of those things. The instinct of a woman who had grown up watching her father move through the world and had absorbed, without being taught, that sick people need more than medication left on the table. She knocked once quietly and entered anyway. The room was large and dark. Z1 was in the bed, half upright against the headboard, eyes closed. She registered this distantly, practically, less frightening horizontal. His authority required him to be standing, moving, occupying space with intention. Lying down, he was just a man with a high fever and nobody sitting beside him. She set down the tray she'd brought. Soup she'd made herself in the staff kitchen, quietly, a cool towel and water. She pulled the chair close to the bed and sat. He opened his eyes and they looked at each other. His gaze was still sharp even through the fever. He watched her the way he probably watched everything, with assessment running underneath the surface. "Who sent you?" he said. "Nobody," she said. "You mean to say nobody? You step in here on your own, and why? No one does that. Aren't you scared?" "I'm sorry, sir. I'm only trying to help out, just couldn't stop myself. I've seen my dad passed away through illness and now I'm your servant. I wouldn't have no owner if anything happens to you either, do. I know what it will be for me after that." Kemi turned and was about to step out of the room. Z1 exhaled and said, "No need to step out, you can stay." She brought out the towel and placed it against his forehead. He didn't stop her. She wasn't sure if that was because he lacked the energy to, or because some part of him, the part that lived underneath the empire and the coldness and the name that made rooms go quiet, recognized what was being offered and didn't know how to refuse it. She stayed until he slept. She came back the next morning and so forth. She learned him in those weeks the way you learn something you're not supposed to, sideways, in pieces, through observation rather than conversation. He slept lightly and woke disoriented before his mind caught up with his body, and in those first seconds before full consciousness, he looked so calm. She suspected very few people had ever seen. He didn't ask for things. He waited to see if they appeared, and when they did, he registered them without acknowledgement, and she understood that. She talked to him sometimes, not about anything important. Just the soup and whether he could keep it down and whether she should open the window for air. She talked because silence in a sick room has weight. He never asked her name, he only said once to her, "Thank you." By the end of the second week, the fever had broken. She knew it the morning she walked in and found him sitting up fully, both eyes clear and focused, looking at the door when she entered as if he had been waiting for it to open. She stopped just inside the threshold. "Better," she said. "Yes," he said. She nodded. Began to gather the things on the tray from the night before. "You came every day," he said. She paused. "Yes, despite the fact nobody sent you." He was quiet for a moment and she could feel his eyes on her. "What is your name?" he asked finally. She stopped with her hand on the door frame. "Kemi," she said. "A sweet, kind woman, if I must say, and I wonder why your family traded you out for the debt," he said. Kemi didn't look back nor say anything, she just slowly walked out. Z1 had not announced anything. He simply began to act, and the world around him reorganized itself accordingly. Her duties changed. Nobody told her why. She was no longer mopping floors, was no longer serving meals in rooms that required her to leave quickly. Table turns, quietly, without explanation, to lighter work. Better quarters. A room with a window that faced the garden instead of the wall. He walked past her in the corridor one afternoon. The first time she had seen him vertical and fully himself since the fever, and he stopped. The men behind him stopped too. He looked at her for a long moment with that assessing gaze that had unnerved her the first time she saw it through a sickroom door and no longer unnerved her quite as much. "You need anything," he said. "Fine," she said. He held her gaze one beat longer, then he walked on. She stood in the corridor after he'd gone and told herself that her heart rate was completely normal. Things began happening in increments. Instructions given to staff about her comfort that he delivered in Korean, not knowing she had begun to pick up fragments of the language. A evening he appeared in the backyard where she sometimes sat after her duties were finished and didn't explain his presence. Just lowered himself into the chair beside her and watched the dark with her in silence for an hour before leaving without a word. She found, to her own quiet surprise, that she did not fear him. She had expected to be because he was the head of one of the most feared mafia family in the region. He received her as a debt payment and ran an empire built on things she never asked about and didn't want described to her. But she had sat beside him while he was breakable and had seen the unguarded seconds before his mind caught up with his body in the mornings. She had talked to him about soup and airflow and nothing important, and somewhere in all of that she had found the shape of the man underneath the empire. And the man underneath the empire was not gentle. He would never be gentle. That wasn't what he was, but real. Underneath everything, stubbornly, inconveniently real. And real she could work with. Z1 appeared at the door of her quarters one evening, fully composed as always, and yet with something in the set of his shoulders that told her this had cost him something.
"I never expected things to turn out like this."
This showing up without the armor of authority to do the work for him. "Not good at this," he said. She looked at him. "At what?" He didn't answer right away. She waited. He stopped, looked at a point past her shoulder, then back at her. "Saying things," he said finally, "that are not orders." Something in her felt the emotion. He looked at her for a long moment. "I want you here," he said. "Not as my servant nor a debt. As mine." She had thought about this moment, had turned it over in the nights when sleep was slow. Had asked herself what she would do with it if it arrived. She thought about Susan. About being dragged out of a house at dawn. Her father who couldn't protect her anymore and 14 months of nobody, and now this. The most feared man in the Korean mafia standing at her door telling her in his blunt, graceless, completely unadorned way that he wanted her. She thought about what she wanted. "Then handle it right," she said. "I'm not a transaction. I'm not a settlement. If you want me, you do it with your whole chest and you do it properly." His jaw tightened slightly. Then something at the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the memory of one. "Handle it right," he said. Z1 took her to an event. The venue was the kind of place that announced its own importance before you walked through the door. Crystal chandeliers that caught the light and threw it back in pieces. Men in tailored and women draped in silk and diamonds moving through the room. Kemi stood at the entrance beside Z1 and took it all in quietly. She wore deep burgundy, a gown that fell clean to the floor, structured at the shoulders, open at the back in a way that was elegant rather than desperate for attention. Her jewelry was simple and deliberate. She had looked at herself in the mirror before leaving the estate and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that the woman looking back was someone who belonged somewhere. Z1 had said, "You look beautiful," when she appeared at the top of the stairs, and then offered his arm. They moved through the room together. She felt the glances, the subtle recalibration that happens in a crowd when something unexpected walks in. People who knew Z1, and most people in this room knew Z1, or knew enough about him to maintain a careful distance, registered her presence beside him, and didn't know what to do with it. She was not the kind of woman they expected. She kept her chin level and her expression still and stayed beside him and let them look. It was during the first hour that it happened. A man materialized at Z1's shoulder, broad, expensively dressed, with the loud confidence of someone who has never once been told to lower his voice. Another family, the kind of man who measured his own importance by how freely he spoke in rooms where other men were careful. He clapped Z1 on the shoulder with the familiarity of someone performing closeness rather than feeling it. "Z1. The Mafia Don, he smiled wide. Then his eyes slid to Kemi.
You brought your servant to the event. Is she here to work in beautiful
The
clothes?
people nearby went very still. The kind of still that happens when a room collectively realizes someone has just made a catastrophic miscalculation. Z1 turned slowly. Repeat that, he said. The man's smile faltered. He couldn't repeat it. He saw the anger in Z1's face. The words had dissolved somewhere between his brain and his mouth. Z1 let the silence sit. Then, precisely, he said, "You will apologize to her now, in front of everyone in this room who heard what you said. Or less I will have to sort it out my way." The man looked at Kemi. He stopped. Tried again. The loud confidence was entirely gone now, replaced by something much smaller and much more honest. "I'm sorry about what I said earlier." He said it to her directly, because Z1's eyes left him no alternative. "I spoke without thinking. I meant no disrespect." Kemi looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once. The man stepped back. Z1 turned away from him as if he had already ceased to exist and placed his hand at the back of Kemi's and guided her forward. Nobody said anything. The dancing started an hour later, couples moving onto the floor. The music was low and orchestral. Z1 appeared at her side. She had been standing near the edge of the floor, watching, holding a glass. He stopped beside her, and for a moment they both just watched the dancers. Then he turned to her and simply extended his hand. She looked at his hand and then at him. She took it. He led well. She hadn't expected that because he did everything with the same controlled precision, and dancing was just another form of it. His hand at her waist was firm without being forceful. His steps were measured. He kept his eyes on her face and nowhere else, which in a room full of people watching them was its own declaration. She relaxed into it gradually. Let the music do what music does. Around them, the room had noticed. She could feel it, the collective shift of attention, the whispers moving through the crowd, surprise and confusion. Something that looked almost like wonder on a few of them, because this was not the Z1 they knew. The Z1 they knew did not dance at events. Do not stand close to anyone with that particular quality of attention. They had never seen him like this, and she understood. Moving with him across that floor with the chandeliers throwing light above them, and the crowd watching in disbelief, that this was what it looked like when a man like Z1 chose someone. Not with words nor announcements, with showing up beside her in a room full of people who mattered to him professionally, and making it completely, unmistakably clear that she mattered more. She met his eyes and he held hers. In the space between them, quiet, private, entirely their own despite the 100 people surrounding them, something settled into place. Few months later came the ceremony, Korean tradition, and private in keeping with the way Z1 did everything. Without performance. She wore a hanbok. He stood across from her, and both bowed to each other. When tradition was done, he looked at her the way he had looked at her in the sick room through the fever, fully, without the armor, and she looked back the same way. "I see you," the look said. On both sides. "I see you." She was now Kemi Z1, queen of the Hina Mafia Empire. The woman the staff moved for, the woman the men deferred to, the woman whose name was spoken in the organization with the particular careful respect that is only ever given to someone the most dangerous man in the room has publicly, irrevocably claimed. From servant to queen, the house that had swallowed her now answered to her. Susan visited on a Thursday morning. Kemi was in the main sitting room reviewing household accounts when the information came that a woman had arrived at the gate. Gave her name as Susan, said she is family. Kemi set down the papers. She took her time walking to the entrance and stopped 6 feet away from her. She let the silence sit. "Kemi." Susan's voice was soft, compressed. I know what I did. I know there's nothing." "Stop," Kemi said. Susan stopped. "I'm going to say this once," Kemi said. "You have no reach here. You have no place. Whatever you came to ask for, whatever you came to say, go back with it. I don't need your apology and I don't need your peace." Susan's eyes filled. "Kemi, please." "I told you to stop. You made your choice the morning you dragged me out of that house. You chose your daughter and I understand that, but understanding it doesn't make you someone I owe anything to." She took 1 step forward. "Keep your distance from me, Susan. Don't come to my gate. Don't say my name in conversations I'm not in. Don't cross my path." She paused. Let the next words land cleanly without decoration. "Unless you have a death wish." She held Susan's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and walked back into the house and didn't look back. Behind her, she heard Susan begin to cry. She kept walking. She found Z1 in his office, standing at the window the way he stood when he was thinking. He heard her enter and turned. He read her face. He had gotten good at reading her face. This man who had spent a lifetime reading rooms and people in situations for threat, and had discovered that reading her was different, that it required something other than calculation, and he just held out one hand. "Come here, my love," she crossed the room and took it, and the both kissed softly. Outside, the Empire was quiet and gates were closed. Stay tuned for the next twist, and I still remain Charles, your writer and director. See you all in the next one, my lovely viewers across the global.